Hello, and welcome to the Chasing Poker Greatness YouTube channel. Today's video is the first in the Tactical Tuesday Strategy Combine series, where Coach Brad and myself break down hands from the nodes that impact your win rate the most. I'll tell you more about the Strategy Combine during the break, but first, this week's episode of Tactical Tuesday.
Welcome to today's episode of Tactical Tuesday. This is your host, Coach Brad Wilson. I am joined, as always, by Mr. John Chai. How you doing, sir?
Doing good. Excited to start the series on the Strat Combine episodes of Tactical Tuesday. And yeah, today, like you've probably heard in the intro, we have 2-bet pots IPPFR, just basically one of the highest impact nodes that we've seen in pretty much all the wolves that we've seen in the golden data set. And yeah, we're here to show you how you can win more at this node that you probably play very, very frequently if you play 6 max cash.
And if you're, from Europe or unfamiliar with the NFL, the Combine is an assessment of college players as they prepare to make the leap to the NFL level. It's measuring their skills in various areas, and it's the product. It doesn't have anything to do with farming, which I think could be an easy misconception. There's no tractors here. This is pure business. It's a very serious thing. No tractors involved. So let's look at this node in position as a pre-flop raiser in a 2-bet pot. Very common situation, and it's especially going to be relevant when you open the button versus the big blind. This is the highest frequency scenario because you open the most hands from the button, and the big blind will defend facing 2-bets at the highest frequency as well, facing the button. So yeah, when you're in position 2-bet pot PFR, this is what we're talking about. In general, I would say this is going to make up 50 to 60% of all of your in position 2-bet pots as a pre-flop raiser are going to be button versus big blind. With that said, we've got the old ace of spades, 3 of hearts on the button. We open to $30, small blind folds, big blind calls. We're playing 5-10, no limit, and got about $1,000 behind, so 100 BBs behind. Flop is pretty good, I would say. 3-3-9 rainbow. We have trips with ace kicker. Our opponent checks, and here we are, decision point number 1.
Yeah, so today's episode is going to focus heavily on value, and I think value is, compared to bluff catchers and bluffing, is going to be significantly, or is going to have the most significant impact on your 2-bet pot IPPFR win rate. And generally, value has the biggest impact on your win rate at every single node, so it's really, really important to make sure that you're getting the max when you flop super strong value like this. So today's episode is going to be focused mostly on my thoughts and Brad's thoughts on what the right thing to do when you flop some thick value, as they say. What the right thing to do is when you flop some thick value. So starting out here, I think you can go a lot of different ways on the flop. You can start out, I think, the most standard thing is what you just saw right here, is just a small flop c-bet with your entire range on 9-3-3. I think that's the easiest way to manage your strategy. So I don't think there's too much to talk about as it relates to flop c-bet size. This isn't where I'm going to be making any big deviations or big effort to stack my opponent just yet. Just going to be consistent with my flop c-bet size on paired dry boards like 9-3-3 rainbow.
And to be clear, we also have to say that you mentioned stacking your opponent, and I would say that while it's the dream to stack your opponent when you have thick value, the ultimate goal is to win the most money that you can possibly win, right? And you don't always get an opportunity to stack your opponent, and that just has to be okay. But yes, the home run scenario is to be able to stack your opponent, but the SPR is really, really high. We're going to need them to raise at some point, most likely. And so, yeah, we just try to bear in mind for the listener that winning the max is the goal. And if we can stack them, great, but it's a 2-bet pot and it's a paired board, and it's going to be hard to get in all the bets that are necessary in order to stack your opponent. And I say all this having not seen the hand, but I have to imagine inevitably we'll stack our opponent here in some way, shape, or form. But I just want to preface that, remember the goal. The goal is to maximize your profit when you have these hands. And so that doesn't mean that you always get to stack them. Sometimes you got to play for smaller bets in various situations because it makes strategic sense. And that is the path to maximizing EV.
Yeah, that's what we're doing here. Smaller bet, but not to worry. We still have 2 streets left to try to put a bunch of money in the pot. So turn ace of diamonds, we turn a boat, so our hand gets even better. assume the big blind is going to check again. And this is where I think this is where we start giving a lot of feedback to, especially newer wolves who come into the program. And I think what we see is a lot of like half pot, 70% bet sizes here. A lot of the times when I ask, players that I'm coaching, hey, like what, why did you pick that size, or why did you go bigger on the turn or the river? A really common answer that I get is like, I didn't want to scare them off. I wanted to get called. Right. And I think that leads to not winning the max, or not winning as much as you could in a whole bunch of different spots, but especially in single race spots where you really do need to kind of give a little extra, push a little harder to win stacks, right? It's generally pretty difficult to get 100 big blinds in the middle in a single race pot. Much easier to do in 3-bet pots and 4-bet pots. So this is the street where I really, really start deviating and start just chunking in some huge bets in an effort to hopefully stack my opponent on the river. But if not, I still think that huge bet sizes is the way to go. Do you want to speak on that a little bit and kind of the difference in EV in terms of betting really huge here or even on the river, and the difference between that and betting smaller?
It boils down to targets, I think, and whether you bet 70% or pot or 1.5x or maybe even 2x, I think that generally your target is 3x and your target is ace-x, of which you block both of them pretty substantially, right? Like so the reality is that, while them folding is not the outcome that we want, again, that's not our goal. Our preventing them from folding is not our goal. Our goal is to maximize EV. And so we need to place bets, recognizing that, like, okay, they're going to fold a ton here, but when they do have a hand that can continue, we want to win the maximum. Our goal is not to keep them in the pot until the river. Our goal is to win the maximum. So, yeah, like I think this is a spot that makes natural sense as an overbet. The ace turn, it's a card that the preflop raiser is going to be perceived to rep very, very often. We have flush draws in our range that villain can see. And when we overbet the turn, we're polarizing and we're saying that, like, we've got something like ace king plus ace nine plus something like that, a tray plus, which is quite difficult to have. So, like, it wouldn't be super shocking to me if villain called the turn with a 9 once we overbet. So, yeah, I think that, like, and this is always the trick of it, right? Is that there's no, like, cookie cutter solution for playing your value in every single scenario. A lot of spots are very unique and they're singular, and it requires a lot of thought. And I actually think that, you spoke about how value makes up the biggest impact on your win rate. Well, I think the reason why there's so much volatility in value is that there's a lot of different ways that you can play value, a lot of different sizes you can choose, a lot of different paths. And it's because of all of these options that there's such variance in folks, how many big blinds they win when they do have value, just because of the sheer quantity of options, right? With bluffing and bluff catching, it's generally simplified. There are not as many options with bluffing and bluff catching, but with value, you got the world is your oyster. And, if you, one thing that, like, I've heard again and again and again and again through one-to-one coaching and wolves, just pretty much everywhere, is like, we'll be bluffing and then all of a sudden, like, we make quads or something. Like, somehow we just, like, make a really big hand. I guess quads it's hard to beat bluffing. And
beat bluffing and make, yeah.
Well, okay, you start the flop bluffing and then you, like, run out trips. And then inevitably the thing that they say is, wow, I didn't have a plan for this happening. And then it's almost like they've got to spontaneously come up with whatever their plan is, because, like, oh, I know how I would play bluffs here, but, like, when I flop quads, I don't know what to do. Like, I don't really have a good plan for it, because, it's a rarer event, right? We make full houses, we make quads, we flop sets, we have trips, we make straights, we make flushes. Like, that's a much more rare event than making nothing or making, like, bottom pair. And so I think that, like, having solid plans is something that, the listener should really take to heart and realize that, like, again, it's really pivotal that you take your time in these spots, because they're rare opportunities to maximize your win rate. And that's another thing I see, is people just acting way too quickly and not evaluating all their possible options in this situation. So anyway, that's my spiel on value betting on the turn here. But there are certainly spots where I'm going to value bet 70% or 50% or even 30% or 150 or 200 with my strongest hands, and it really depends on the individual situation that I'm in. But in this one, yeah, I like overbet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good. That's what the wolf who submitted this hand, that's what he goes and does, 150% pot on the turn.
As a recap for the podcast listener, the board is ace 339 and we have ace 3, so we got a boat. Our opponent calls.
Yeah, and just same story on the river. Basically just a repeat of everything that we said on the turn. Now we have SPR2 instead of, some other kind of painfully high SPR that we might have gotten if we bet a smaller size, but kind of due to our
SPR4 if we bet 70%. So SPR4 if we bet 70, SPR2 because we overbet.
Yeah, and this is, again, much more reasonable SPR, I think, to just put in the whole stack. Again, nice thing about having a lower SPR when you are jamming the river for value is that it forces your opponent to defend a wider range than if you had a higher SPR. So, long story short, I think when this wolf played this hand just perfectly, this is exactly like the type of value betting advice that we give in our coaching sessions. Just put in 100 big blinds somehow and wins the stack in a single raise pot, button versus big blind. And I think a lot of what I would expect to see from either newer wolves or non-wolves that that I've coached before. It's just like 70% on the turn and then like 70% on the river, and you get called by ace 5 and you walk away from the hand feeling pretty good about it because you won a decent pot.
That's a problem, right? Is that like whenever you bet the turn and bet the river like 70, or maybe even like half or something like that, and you win the pot, you're like, haha, I won the hand, right? That's where it ends. We don't like investigate whether or not this was the best path to take, the highest EV. We just say, oh, we won the pot, right? When we're doing post-session analysis in our database, we typically don't look at the biggest pots that we won and ask ourselves, wow, could I have played this better? Could I have won more money? We look at the biggest losses and ask ourselves, was this avoidable? Should I fold the river? Did I miss a bluff here? And I think that, again, like really thinking about value and like filtering to your strongest hands and asking yourself these questions is just incredibly, incredibly helpful. And, it's likely going to move the needle more than wondering whether or not you should have folded the river with some bluff catcher in a situation. But again, it's not super intuitive to look at the biggest pot you won and ask, could I have won more? Could I have done better?
Yeah.
As promised in the intro, here's a closer look at the CPG Strategy Combine. The Strategy Combine is a database analysis tool that will allow you to analyze your game like a professional, identify where you're crushing and where your game needs work, compare yourself at every major node to the best players in the CPG Wolves CFP, see how you stack up versus the top players on our high-stakes team, create an improvement plan based on the specific nodes that most urgently need your attention. Focus your time and energy on the spots that matter the most. Go to chasingpokergreatness.com/CPG Strategy Combine to read testimonials from the beta group as well as register yourself for the next Combine. I hope to see you there. Now, back to Tactical Tuesday.
So, second hand here in our 2-bet pot IPBFR value themed episode. This one is going to occur at $2.50, $2.50, no limit, 500 NL.
Yeah.
We're in the cutoff with pocket nines, and the kind of the value betting or the attempt to win a big pot with strong value can even start pre-flop. And I think that's why this hand is a particularly good example of maxing value 2-bet pots IPBFR. You don't necessarily need to wait until you flop something really strong in order to start targeting your opponents for the max. The player in the small blind here, I believe, is just a whale, someone who's playing like 80% VPIP, if I remember the HUD stats correctly. And one of the things that you can do just immediately off the bat pre-flop is if you see a player like that in the blinds that is very likely to over defend and just play too wide of a range and do things like find flats in the small blind, you can just open larger with your stronger hands, right?
Yeah.
You can, instead of the standard, 2.5x open to $12.50, the wolf here decides to open to twice that amount and open to 5 big blinds for $25. And as we'll see, it's going to get called by the whale. And yeah, I think this is a great example of just going after the value even earlier than most people might think that you can. And opening to larger sizes is oftentimes the first step in maximizing your value to bet pots IPPFR when you have weak players in the blinds.
Yeah, and I would direct the listener to go back to an old episode of the CBG podcast where I had Kevin Rabichow on, and he was playing heads up he was in Australia, and he was playing like 25-50 heads up against a player who was just pretty much calling everything, not really folding pre. And eventually it got to the point where he was opening to $1,000 pre-flop, right? Whatever hand he opened in the small blind, he's opening 20 big blinds, and the guy's still calling, right? And I think it's like really important to recognize that there's room to experiment still in poker as it relates to these scenarios. And Rabichow didn't make it to $1,000 from like 2.5x or 2x or 3x even. He slowly increased over time, right? He tested, okay, will they call 200 pre? Will they call 300 pre? Will they call 400? Will they call 500? Like, at what point do they start folding? And eventually, made it to $1,000, opening to 20 big blinds, which if you look at that in isolation, you would think, oh, that's insane, right? That's ridiculous. How could anybody ever do that? And yet Kevin Rabichow is one of the best heads-up players on the entire face of the planet, in the entire known universe. So, yeah, like there's always room to kind of push your edges, especially as, your competition is lower. And this is just a solid example of that. Opening the 5x, $25 from the cutoff here. Who knows? We could open it 10x and maybe the small blind still calls. Like, we don't know. That's still like a complete unknown. But yeah, like pushing the limit as it relates to like maxing value here, I think is something that, yeah, again, is just a general mistake of being satisfied with the status quo, being satisfied with winning a medium-sized pot when you could, go for the jugular and try to win a really, really big pot with your value in a lot of situations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so we get kind of a dream flop, ace-9-6. We flop middle set. There's $55 in the pot now, so the SPR's at a point to where we can probably play for stacks in a 2-bet pot. This is thanks to our 5x open. It's set up by the 5x open. And now the hero just goes ahead and starts betting 75% on ace-9-6. Honestly, could probably size up if they really wanted to and overbet, I think, targeting straight draws and ace-x. But that's neither here nor there. Turn is d4 of hearts. You want to add any input? I don't know how much strategic input it is. I think we're
not
pretty much
I think
going for it all.
I think one of the only thing that I'll say is about the flop c-bet size and how, this wolf has very clearly identified the small blind as sort of like the target in these types of hands. And one of the things that you can see the wolf do immediately on the flop, which is different from hand number one, was he just sized up on the flop. He's like, whatever, 3/4 pot, just going to bet big sizes and, be a little bit, be a little bit like disrespectful to what he thinks this player's defense range is. Or you could probably say he's being a little bit disrespectful pre-flop with his opening size, but hey,
let's not freaking sugarcoat this. He's being disrespectful, all right? Like that's
okay.
Not a little bit. He's being disrespectful, and to be honest, maybe he should be even more disrespectful, right? Like, I think there's this like weird taboo about being like, oh, it's being a little just be when somebody's strategy allows you to be disrespectful, then be disrespectful. There's no shame in it.
Yeah. Okay. So, anyways, the big c-bet size versus this player, I really, really like it even on a board that says dry as ace-9-6 rainbow. And yeah, here we go, trying to play for stacks, and we don't even need to overbet the turn like we had to in the other hand because we opened so large pre-flop, right? Like this is like, look at all the great things that happen downstream when you just tack on a few extra big blinds pre-flop.
We opened to 5 bigs, and now without ever overbetting, we're able to play for stacks. Like we 70% of the flop, we bet 108 on the turn, which is the 4 of hearts. We still have middle set. River is a pretty much inconsequential queen, and the SPR is at about 1. And it's for the podcast listener, the YouTube viewer, it's not a coincidence that the SPR is like slightly under 1 here by the river. This is a plan that was set up by every single future action, and we jam and they fold.
Yeah, unfortunately, don't win the stack here, but I think this hand was still perfectly played by the wolf who submitted. Unfortunately, we don't have a hand history either.
So we don't know what they had, but they did fold. And, it's definitely possible they have 7-8, they have 10-8, maybe like 7-5.
Yeah,
who knows?
yeah.
Some kind of like gut shot or straight draw, right? In which case, if they have a gut shot or straight draw, then we still won the maximum from that hand category, and that's okay too. But yeah, I think in position PFR 2-bet pot with value, it's something that I think is under prioritized in study and learning and research, and this is why when we analyze folks' database, it's commonly a node where you can make improvements.
Yeah, that's it for this week on this week's topic of single race spots in position. And next week we'll move on to the next node in the Strat Combine.
Don't forget to like and subscribe. Go to chasingpokergreatness.com. Check out the CPG Strategy Combine if you would like your data analyzed so you can see where you should be studying in order to get better at this game that we all love so much. That's all I got.
See you next week.
Don't miss out on our next great poker adventure. Hit that subscribe button and join the CPG family.
This is Tactical Tuesday on Chasing Poker Greatness with your hosts, Brad Wilson and John Chai. Coach Brad approved. Are you a lone wolf searching for the ultimate pack? The CPG Wolf program is a close-knit brotherhood hell-bent on one thing only: chasing poker greatness. Powered by bleeding-edge wolf strats and led by Coach Brad and his lieutenants, CPG Wolves are systematically prepared for almost any spot they'll encounter on the green felt. If you want to plug into an elite team and have a step-by-step game plan to realize your full poker potential, you can apply at cpgwolves.com. Space is limited, and the pack is only as strong as its weakest member. So only the hungriest, grittiest, and most driven will be accepted into the program. Applications are open at cpgwolves.com.